Hi, I hope that's a cheer because you're really excited to get the day started. Good. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. After this morning's keynote, we will finally be doing the group photo, so please don't rush off. And if you would like a country delegation photo, please talk to Jose. Jose, are you here? Jose? Can you stand up and wave so everybody knows to come and see you, please? That's Jose up the back. If you would like a photo of your country delegation, your association, of you, he's the man to see. We have 2 headsets missing, so if you forgot and put them in your bag last night as a souvenir, or please see. Oh, you found them. Lovely. Phew. Thank you. There have been 2 changes. There have been 2 changes to the schedule for today. So this afternoon's last session with the topic International Sign and NGT Interpreting is now moving up to an earlier slot. That will be in stream 2. So I'll let you look at your programs. That's replacing the International Sign Accreditation panel. The panel will now be the very last session of the day here. But there will be the signs on each door of the amphitheatres will indicate that. And at 11 o'clock this morning, there was to be a paper in this stream about deaf interpreters in South Africa. That is now being replaced by a paper by Professor Christian Rathman. Thank you. Finally, if you decide during a presentation that you would like to leave the room, can you please do so with courtesy? So keep the noise to a minimum, because there are presenters, working interpreters, chairs and delegates that still want to enjoy the presentation or work the presentation. So that would be really lovely and respectful. Thank you. I would now like to welcome Deborah Russell to chair this morning's keynote.
Good morning, everybody. It's my honour to introduce our keynote speakers for this morning. You'll have seen in the conference programme their bio. We have Ronice, Muller and Marianna, Rossi, Stumpf. You can see that they're both highly accomplished women. They work at universities. They work as educators. They work as researchers. They're authors, they write books, they publish journal articles. And it's very clear that they have a heart for deaf and hearing collaboration. I visited their university last year in October, and it was just awe-inspiring for me. And the 2 of them were beautiful hosts of a conference. They invited me to a small conference. Their definition of small is somewhat different from mine. I arrived to 800 participants, all using sign language. All the presentations were in Libras. It was just such a beautiful experience, so well organised, and such a great event to be at. And there were 2 days that were focusing on sign language interpreting, research. So the 4-day conference in total with 800 participants, just signing all the time. I don't think I saw anyone speak once. I just think that's such a great model for the world to see and aspire to follow. Thank you very much. Brazil have been very humbly quiet in their leadership. But I can see that they're changing the world. And those two women are game changers for our world. I think you have 15 deaf professors at your university. Sorry, 18. In their university working, hearing professors who always use sign language, and they've also been a great example for other universities to establish programs throughout Brazil. So these women really do change the world. Welcome to how we can shape the future. Good morning, everybody. Bom dia. And thank you very much to WASLI for inviting us today. We're delighted to be here in front of you. And we thought we'd talk about Brazil. I'm a deaf woman. My name is Marianna Stumpf.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ronice Muller de Quadros. And the two of us are co-workers at the university. We focus on sign language, and this is our sign for university. The Federal University de Saint Catherine. Catarina.
So, back when we were young, I used to teach deaf children, and we were based in the same school. We taught different classes, I have to say, but we knew of each other. I knew her family. Ronice's family is deaf, so I'd seen her around, and we were in the same social circles. We wanted to lobby for laws for the recognition of sign language in Brazil. Ronice started her PhD, then I started my PhD, and then I went to work at the university in Santa Catarina. And then, since then, we've been side by side for how many years?
Oh, I would say maybe 15 years so far.
So we just want to share with you some of our experiences over that time. So just to give you a brief understanding of Brazil, you can see from the map, we're in South America. We have 230 million inhabitants, and we have about 8 million deaf or hard of hearing people, according to the census in 2018. And as you know, many countries in South America speak Spanish, but we're a Portuguese-speaking nation, and our sign language is Libras. So you'll see us use the sign Libras. This is the sign that we have for our sign language. So when you see that, you know we're talking about the sign language used in Brazil.
All right, so at the University de Saint Catarina, this is what our campus looks like. And we set up a sign program in Brazil. It was the first sign language program for Libras. I started working there in 2002, and I was working on my own for a while. There was no support. We looked at sign language across the country, the needs of the deaf community. And I realized we needed to establish a sign language program. And so I decided to bring in individuals from across the country, and some are here today in the audience with us. We looked at how to create a curriculum for instruction. We looked at Libras, the sign language, interpreting and translation issues, and I brought several experts together. And we've learned quite a lot from the people that we've had a chance to work with. And we're very fortunate to have these individuals with us. So we have to applaud the work that they've done and their contributions. So over the years, we've been working hard to develop a number of initiatives. And right now, we have a department of Libris. There are 29 full-time professors employed, and they're in full-time positions, much like their peers throughout the university. There are around 18 deaf individuals and 11 hearing instructors, and so altogether 28 faculty members, or 29, sorry. And so everyone's using Libris on the campus. We have many hearing colleagues as well. They all sign, and this has had a huge impact on our university, seeing Libris being used at that level. We also have full-time staff, an interpreter, and in total there's 13 working in Libris. And we have more interpreters and translators who we bring in on a contract basis. So if the work requires it, we will bring in outside interpreters as well into the university. But we do have 13 full-time staff interpreters.
It's probably important for us to mention how we got Libris recognized in law. It was a significant lobbying effort, but by 2002 we had the law to recognize Libris and to realize that that was something of the deaf community. But the deaf community really wanted us to lobby for something stronger, so we had a decree in 2005 which said that deaf school children must be taught bilingually, and also that for a variety of services, health services, etc., interpreters must be provided, and that interpreters must be trained at university, and that sign language teachers must be trained at university. And so we saw our projects bear fruit in the establishment of these laws. Many deaf people were going into universities, not just Santa Catarina, but other places across Brazil, and we started to see that people wanting to achieve degrees in architecture, computer science, etc., etc. And then we started to see the issue was we didn't have an interpreting profession ready to provide access for that need. And so we undertook some research to see how we could improve that situation.
So now that gives you a sense of what Brazil looks like in the context that we work within and our university. And so now what we'd like to do is look at why we are here today and the purpose of our presentation. We will be looking at the future, and together Marianna and I will talk about what it's going to look like in Brazil, and it's very inspiring. So one of the reasons we're here, and there's actually two that I'd like to share with you, but we want to look at teaching, translation, and interpreting and how that has developed in Brazil, but also how we've worked on our research focus, and we'd like to strengthen that in the Brazilian context. And I think those two are significant endeavors for us. So we're teaching various individuals to become interpreters and translators. They're then going out and establishing various sign language programs, specifically for sign language instructors, and then also for translators and interpreters. And that's been occurring for the last while. But we do need more research to advance the field, and we need further research, and we hope to expand the pool across Brazil of researchers looking at Libris. So we have evidence-based practices that we can rely on. So things have been happening fairly quickly, and we've been looking at translation and research on interpretation, and many projects have been initiated. And that is why we're here today, to present. And that's what the future is going to look like.
So we have the Letras Libris Studies. And that is, we have a sign for that. And so if you see this sign, or you see people using that sign in Brazil, they'll know what you're talking about. It's a 4-year program. We have 3,708 hours of instruction. This was first established in 2006. And the idea was that we would then be able to support the training of interpreters. So we had 2 programs, one for Libra studies. And this is established on the same level as other language programs, Portuguese, German, whichever. It's exactly the same level, so it has the same status as an undergraduate bachelor's program. Once people have studied Libras, then we were able to establish a strong network of people who were able to undertake research into Libras. They could see problems, they wanted to find solutions. That enabled us to generate a research program to think about how we could explore those issues. Ronice will then explain more about the establishment of the other programs.
So the program was established for Libras in 2006, and that's when it first began. And at our university, we found funding and we were granted awards from the government to support the program. From there, we were working with 9 different universities across Brazil to partner to deliver the program. And once it was started, our focus was on deaf individuals and deaf education. We wanted these individuals to become instructors in their own right and to build that pool in Libras. At the same time, we realized that there were no graduate degrees, and so we began the Libras program as an undergraduate program on par with other language programs across Brazil and of the same status. There's 427 graduates of the program, of the Libras program, and they teach Libras. The first group came together from all across Brazil, and all are currently working. They found employment, all 427 of them, and so it's been a success. In 2008, well, just before 2008, there were interpreters and translators, but they wanted more information about Libras and more training, and what was available didn't really fit their needs. So we had training for instructors of Libras, but the interpreters and translators wanted something more specific to their field. So a number asked about working in the court system. And we're asked, by the court system to focus on interpreters and translators in that setting. And so the university was willing to accept that. And then in 2008, we began a program for this cohort, and it was a sign language program. It was for interpreters and translators specifically. We also had the Libras program for Libras instructors, and so we continued that, and we had 2 focuses then on translation and interpreting, and then Libras, and it was a very interesting time. The Libras program was quite successful. We had many candidates for the program, and it took off. The interpreting and translating program also was very successful and very popular, and both have grown over the years. We've had many graduates and alumni all across Brazil, and many graduates, and the graduates are working now all across the country.
So we were thinking about the Libras curriculum and thinking about what should be included to ensure that people were well educated. Obviously, they knew both for people who were wanting to study Libras and also sign language interpreting and translation. We felt that the curriculum needed to include cross-cultural information, information about identity, arts, culture more generally. We also felt that they needed some basic linguistic instruction so people understood the structures of Portuguese and Libras and how they were similar and different. We wanted people to be involved in translation studies, both for people who are interested in doing interpreting and also doing translation and research in those things. We see much more video products in sign language, and we're wanting to make sure that we could see the difference between translation and interpreting, and so we wanted to include both translation studies and interpreting studies. We also included a variety of other disciplines, anthropology, psychology, not just linguistics, so that people were well educated before they graduated.
So, as I said, 2008, we established the program, and we looked back on the curriculum. It's been 10 years, and we reviewed what we had done, and we thought, it's a perfect time right now to do that self-reflection and look at what needs to be changed within the curriculum and improved. One of the reasons we thought we needed to change the curriculum was after some discussion within the department. In the past, as I mentioned, I was the only instructor. Then we brought in Marianna and then other deaf individuals, and we grew from 2 to 3, and then our department hired more instructors and faculty. So we thought, now was the time, as the department had grown and we had all this expertise. We had researchers and people from different fields with different frameworks. We talked about the curriculum, and we thought, yes, it was time to change and review it. Also, we had to start thinking about what was the curriculum for? Who was the cohort that we were addressing? Who were the people out there that needed the services we were providing? What was the profile, for example, the individual professionals coming to us? Who were they working? Where were they working? What do their fields demand? And what were they doing? At the same time, we'd been working for 10 years, conducting a lot of research, and we had some evidence-based practices we wanted to use, and we wanted to see what did that teach us, and how did that inform our practices. So we wanted to include that within the curriculum, and we thought, yes, it was time for a change and to look at our pedagogy.
Ronice and I had many, many discussions about things that we thought we could improve or change, but obviously we wanted to make sure we heard from the deaf community, and we asked, you've seen interpreters working, so you've seen the profession as it is at the moment. When you look at these people, what do you feel is good? Do they have really good spoken Portuguese? Do they have really strong Libra skills? What do you feel is missing? And they gave us many answers for us to reflect upon, and these are the main points that we had. So some of the points were, yes, they're highly skilled in Libras and spoken Portuguese, but we feel that they're missing trust. We're not able to develop that trust rapport. I don't know that they know my lived experience. I want to know their lived experience. That's how we develop trust. Also, ethics. There seems to be some kind of disparity in some of the ethics of professionals, and we wanted to have greater ethics. Also, they felt that there was empathy was missing. It was hard sometimes for people to really understand the situations and the barriers that deaf people were experiencing. And although people had very good linguistic skills, they wanted more empathy in the interpreting process, translation process, and when they were working with interpreters. They also felt that these interpreters worked, but they wanted to feel some sense of belonging, that they would meet them socially within the community, some maybe at parties, in other places, at community events, and that also would help to engender trust. And they also felt that they wanted to have some sense of collaboration, that there was mutual support, and that actually helps the process work better, to understand what's going on. So these were very clear messages from the deaf community. It wasn't about working in a professional manner, but having some humanity in that interpreting role too.
So as Marianna explained, this was the deaf community's view of our graduates, and we took this very seriously. It's very interesting results. They worked with the interpreters every day, and we saw how they processed and how they came along in their field, and we felt that this was very valuable input for us. We wanted to have qualified interpreters, and so we decided to ask them, the interpreters and the translators, about their experiences and what was a skilled interpreter, a professional interpreter, and they did want to increase their skills. We also said, what was your perspective of what makes a good professional? And so we collected information from them, and we've got a summary here on the slide for you to look at. The first thing they talked about, the interpreter said, was that they believed they must be allies with the community. They wanted to work together and in tandem with the deaf community. The second thing that was mentioned was respect. There was a need for respecting the deaf community and sharing information and working in a collaborative environment. Empathy was also reported by them. to understand each other's perspective and view, and so the interpreters felt, yes, that they certainly need that skill to be qualified. The interpreters also talked about acceptance of criticism. If they received feedback, for example, or were asked to modify what they were doing, or were given a different model, that this was something that they had to look at that feedback seriously and negotiate it with the consumers and be willing to accept what they were given, and not to be defensive if that occurred. Also, what was frequently mentioned was competency in translation abilities. They wanted to enhance their skills in that and their proficiency. They wanted to have more flexibility in the more language skills, and they wanted to further their education along those lines. And something that would seem very simple and common sense was that wherever there's an interpreter, if there's deaf people within that context, it was polite and required for them to be using Libris and to interact with the deaf individuals. You know, throughout Brazil, again, in my university in the context, we have many people using Libris, and it's a very solid signing environment, but out in the community, people don't see the same experience. And so there's a lot of deaf people who witness oppression with people talking in front of them, and they'd like the interpreters would like to remember to sign in front of them. And then the last is the code of ethics, or ethical behavior. Now, yes, there are ethical behaviors tied to the profession that the interpreters are aware of, but when we're talking about ethics, we're also talking about morals, we're talking about a value system, treasuring and valuing the people you're working with, and incorporating some of those values. So you can see this list here, and it's fairly comprehensive, and we've seen both the deaf view and the interpreting view on what was required in the education. We looked at both, and we found a number of commonalities and patterns. And I have to tell you, this is not something that's easily instructed for translators and interpreters. It's not an easy job to convey all of this. You can teach Libris, for example, and you can look at individual sign skills. You can teach Portuguese, you can teach specific translation skills, and you can train individuals, you can document their growth. And so we have that, and we have a very good system and a very solid curriculum for doing that. We can make sure that they're speaking and signing appropriately, but these soft skills are a different matter. You know, how do you instruct someone in these different areas? So that's a real challenge for us. Now, we've been struggling with how to incorporate these into the curriculum, and that's our next challenge.
Ronice and I have looked at the people who are working as professional interpreters. We always see that often they may be from deaf families, or they may have deaf friends. We also have to think about individuals who may decide to become interpreters or translators as professionals who don't have that context. Maybe they know other sign languages or other spoken languages. Maybe they know Portuguese and English, or Portuguese and German, and they're very professional. What happens in these contexts? Can we apply that to sign language interpreting as well for people who are translators and interpreters with other language combinations? And we see some similarities and some differences. I mean, as you, I'm sure, may think yourself. There are people who want to become professional interpreters, they have professional values, but of course one of the things is we need to think about ensuring that there's involvement with deaf people. It may be for other interpreters and translators with other languages, that isn't a need for them. But within the deaf community, there's a strong sense that people want to have people mixing with their communities, and of course deaf people are constantly require interpreters to live their daily life. So the community is small, and we need to think about how we can train professionals to meet the needs of that community.
Also, Marianna, we have to think about deaf children as well. You know, as they grow, they may experience working with interpreters, and so they see the interpreters most of their lives and throughout their education. So how do you deal with that as well? So we decided to look at a new curriculum, and I'll talk a little bit about how we've designed it. We started last year, and we made some modifications to it, and these are some of the areas we looked at. The main point of this, though, is to enhance the curriculum and in turn enhance the competencies of the students that we're working with. We had to look at the base level and then work from there. And specifically with interpreters and translators, we had to look at how they work with various individuals and the whole process. One of the things we wanted to do is weave the curriculum so that topics are touched on, and we call that a transversal curriculum. So we have the Libris program and the interpreting program, and we'd like some of that information to be shared between the two programs, and we call that a transversal approach. And you can't teach something, for example, in just one class and expect the learner to know it. That's impossible. So what you must do is then spiral that or include that into different aspects of the curriculum and to all of the classes, so the students see it repeatedly in different contexts. So issues of culture and deaf culture, it's impossible to teach deaf culture in one course. It should be embedded in all the different classes that the students experience. We also want to talk about the deaf community and more issues in the deaf community, and we want more deaf individuals involved in the program as well. We do have full-time professors, but we would like to see more deaf community members involved. We've been using technology and incorporating that into curriculum, but of course we're going to have to be looking at that to further make use of technology while we're teaching. For example, we have labs and various classrooms. We've got students studying sign language interpreting and translation, and they use recording apparatus. But like much anywhere else in the world, they need to also know things like video relay interpreting, video remote interpreting, and so these are topics of technology that we have to embed within the curriculum. Something else that we realized that was essential and a priority was to absolutely have more deaf individuals involved. As I said, we have many deaf professionals and professors right now, but we need other deaf people to be involved within the program. You know, in the Libris field, but also in the interpreting field as well, in the translation field. There's a need to expand their presence there. And so we need to change that within our curriculum.
So if you remember, in the past, Ronice explained about in the program from 2006 to 2012, we had some government funding for that project, and the University of Santa Catarina actually was in charge of a project which partnerships with 15 other universities. Obviously, that project came to an end. But we knew that we had to make sure that we were able to work with other universities to make sure that people could have access to qualifications. And now there are 27 universities offering the BA level degree, and 8 universities offering a bachelor's degree, and 27 universities offering the licensure. This is both for sign language translators and interpreters. So we're very happy to see that the project has had a very positive impact and was enabled all of these universities to set up programs.
Okay, so these various 27 programs were established around Brazil in partnership with us. And the focus was on the instruction of Libris. At the same time, the second part, there were 8 universities that focused on interpreting and translation specifically. So you can see that we went from 27 Libris programs to 8 interpreting and translation programs. So that process has begun. We realized we need to establish more programs throughout Brazil. And you can see some of our numbers on the PowerPoint right now. In terms of graduates, we've had 634 individuals who've received their degrees in Libris, and that has been since 2008 to the present. So the last 10 years approximately. And if you look at the work, though, however, of interpreters, it's typically contract work. There's about 4,000 438 sign language interpreters working in the public sector. So there's obviously a lot of demand there, much more than the graduates that we're producing at this time. So we don't have enough degreed individuals to provide for that demand. Some have gone into different fields, of course, but we still have a huge demand. Many of those sign language interpreters are also not graduates of our program. So we have the 8 universities who are providing the training, but we absolutely need to expand that number. As I said, there was over 4,000 positions or contract jobs for sign language interpreters, and this is in schools, individuals who've been mainstreamed, or various employment sites, or within universities. So they work in a variety of contexts, and again, that's over 4,000 contracts for interpreters. We are still trying to promote the use of Libris, and it means that because of that, the interpreters and translators also need more exposure to Libris. So as our instruction of Libris gets promoted and develops across the country, and that helps professionals who are deaf achieve their goals and take on higher positions, we need interpreters who are able to translate and interpret at that level.
So we've explained the current situation within Brazil, and we know that there have been problems, barriers, challenges. So for example, some people may have problems with equivalence. What's the sign for this within a university setting? What happens when somebody's mainstreamed in school? What's my responsibilities within that setting? So we've seen a variety of things happen over the last 10 years, which we've been able to research. And so now we want to just give you some examples of the research that we've had so that we can start to develop evidence-based practice within interpreting and translation profession. This research is really generated from questions professionals who are working. They want to have help. They want to make sure that they can better serve the deaf community. And so we really felt that we had to take on the responsibility to undertake that research.
So our work has involved, we've looked at the experience of the individuals. We would like to increase their language ability, make the field much more formal, more advanced. You will see here how we've been working across Brazil to advance the profession in various fields, in translation. For example, we've come up with testing for translators, and that's one of our first goals there, the Pro Libris test. And then after that, we began university entrance exams for Libris and for translation of Libris from English into sign language, and that's been quite an accomplishment. So we've come up with a number of initiatives. Also various fields we've looked at in terms of didactic teaching in Libris of math and science and other disciplines. And the translators have to be able to translate for this test. And then we've translated these tests, and we have various versions of those. So we began first with Libris. We make sure that the students are proficient in Libris and fluent. And then we have been adding different content to that. And then they are asked to sign all the different disciplines or fields, and that's a much more advanced skill set for them, and it's a new demand in the curriculum. We have asked a group of researchers in translation studies to work with us and to partner with us for this initiative, and their support has been outstanding. They've helped us to advance our instruction, and so we've learned quite a lot from this field of researchers in translation studies, and they of course look at different disciplines within that field, and so we've learned quite a lot from them in terms of how to do translation studies, and that has helped us to re-examine our curriculum and work with deaf or hearing individuals who are translators or interpreters. And so they look at translation studies and the research there, and it has really advanced our field. But it is really important that we continue to work with the Translation Studies Department and these individuals to improve what we're doing. They provided us a different framework or a different view of what we've been doing. We thought translation and interpreting was, a simple job in essence, but they've helped us to look at and advance the field and have a new understanding of what it means to interpret or translate.
So one of the great impacts that we had, or game changers for the deaf community, was in 2017. You can see the screenshot here. This is a Libras test. This is for students who want to go into universities. Many hearing people for many years have gone into universities, and it's been very difficult for deaf people if they aren't fluent in Portuguese. The deaf community lobbied the government to try and ensure that there was a person in government who really thought, oh, well, Libras probably isn't a proper language or doesn't have the same status as Portuguese. We can talk about complex scientific phenomena in Portuguese, but Libras doesn't really have that vocabulary or doesn't have that complexity as a language. So the deaf community lobbied. We often had problems. The deaf community then contacted our university. We have a lot of experience through the Lettres program, through the interpreting and translation programs, of course, but the Lettres program, and we had 8 deaf individuals who were responsible for translating the test into Libras, not just from our university, Santa Catarina, but from other universities as well. And we wanted to make sure that we had diversity throughout the whole of the community. We had people from Brasilia, the capital, also from the south, and then we were able to ensure that we could bring these people together and actually work towards a Libras translation. It took 3 months in total to bring people together, coming together, generating the translation, and then we hoped that we could demonstrate to the government that we could have a computer test in Libras, which is a Libras version of the National School Leavers Test. Many deaf people wanted to go into university and go into a variety of different fields, computer science, architecture, whatever, and suddenly they had a Libras test. And the government saw, wow, Libras, it can do all of these things that Portuguese can do. So we were congratulated by the government for our work so far, but that's really a wonderful fruit from all of the work that we've done. Often in the test, it tests maths and a variety of different things. The government also will have themes that they want people to write essays on. And they can judge whether people have good essay writing skills. And the government has a variety of themes, so challenges for people in Brazil. And so people can think, oh, so they added this example of challenges for the formal education of deaf people in Brazil. And that was really something which the deaf community felt great about, because it meant that they were being asked about their own experience to talk about. That created a lot of talk in the street. It was really great. As we were wandering along, people said, oh, they're deaf people, this question's been asked. So it was really great political mobilization, and we were really happy to, go to work. But we can see that this is where translation has really contributed significantly to the situation of deaf people in Brazil.
It had a huge impact at that time throughout Brazil. It appeared in the media, and the entire country was now looking at Libras, and the impact that we had was very inspiring. So we were so happy to see that our work had borne such success. So we've required a lot of translation, as you've seen. We've also required a lot of interpretation services, and they have certainly grown and developed. And we've seen a huge change because of those efforts. And so individuals in the field of interpreting and translations and professionals are much needed. And I want to show you now that the fields have developed, and some of it is due to the research that we have performed. And you can see the number, and translation studies, you can see the number of students who've gone through the programs. And this has been in the last 8 or 9 years. You can see the number of students. With deaf students with a master's, there are 42 who have graduated who are deaf. Hearing master's students in, again, translation studies. Sorry, let me just go back, just to clarify. This is only at my university. Santa Catarina, across Brazil, obviously. There are more deaf individuals graduating from other institutions, and they have their statistics and their numbers, yes. But I'm just showing you my university and what our numbers have looked like over the last few years, okay? So we've had 42 masters who were deaf individuals who've graduated from our program. And in terms of hearing graduate students, we've had 40 master students, a little bit less. In terms of deaf individuals with doctorate degrees, we've had 9, and they have graduated and received their doctorates. And in terms of hearing individuals with doctorates, we've had 16. So currently, that'll give you an idea of what we're doing. Now, the PhD students have been progressing in their studies. I've got 11 students right now that I am working with who are working on their doctorate. So there are 11 current candidates, which is a fairly large number, studying Libris and sign language interpreting or translation. And these are some of the topics that they've been researching. You can see them up here on the PowerPoint. One is teaching translation and interpreting and pedagogy. For example, how to develop interpreting and translation skills, how to deal with the challenges of translation and interpreting. Another area for study is sign language interpreters' identity. What does it mean to be a professional and to be self-reflective of your practices? What does that include? How do we promote the field? How do we work in different contexts? How do I take on the characteristics? How do I develop my empathy? How do I perform my duties as an interpreter? Another research focus is on translation competencies, and of course, promoting the use of Libris and advancing the field and translating from written documents into Libris. So that's been a focus of the students. Also looking at interpreting studies and competencies for interpretation. We've looked at terminology as well, in terms of translation studies, and then creating a corpus of translation studies, vocabulary, Libris signs, Portuguese signs, and how to translate certain words, and how to use a system of glossing to represent those, and then what it looks like in Libris, and then contributing to that corpus. And so that's been an area of focus in the research studies. We've looked at technology in translation and sign language translation specifically. So using computer technology and how that becomes Libris and sign language, going from sign language to Portuguese, and some of the commonalities in that process, working between the two languages. One of the very important areas that we've been looking at, which is fairly new, and there's been a lot of discussion about that, is translation in sign language and policies. And so how do policies get formulated? How do they get passed and regulated? How do you gain support for certain policies? If I am a certified interpreter or a graduate with a degree, what is my role in terms of formulating policies, and how to work with the deaf individuals and how to create a movement to create correct policies. Also, interpreting in various environments is another area, various contexts.
So you can see there's lots of research, but I thought it would be good to give you some examples. There's one hearing person who did their MA in Brazil. Many people in Brazil use sign writing. And so they may go, we know in written Portuguese, we see different ways of writing, and it's different from spoken Portuguese. And so we're interested in also what happens when you're annotating using sign writing. Breno was also interested in looking at the translation of religious texts. We know that in Brazil, we have translations in French and German, etc., and he was just interested in whether there were signs that you could use to actually translate religious texts. And that also is interesting, showing the parity between Libras and other languages which can be used to translate sacred texts.
This is another researcher, Carlos Rodriguez. He has been looking at the principles of translation and interpretation and a model of the process. So he's been examining various individuals and professionals to see what their translation and interpreting abilities look like, what a good interpreter looks like, and how they function. And he's been selecting examples of some of their best work, and you'll see that later on.
Natalia, a hearing woman, was also asking how you translate music and other things. What extra visual information do you need to dancing or other extra linguistic resources are important to teach people who are working? There are many musical concerts which people want access to. What else do you need to do to ensure you're an effective translation or interpretation?
Another researcher here, Jose Souza, who started in published in 2014. You can see up here his focus of his research. He's looking at, for example, how codas use sign language and how they then become professional sign language interpreters, how they reflect on themselves, their identity, how they're involved in the deaf community, and how to best work as a coda and to understand your identity as a coda and an interpreter.
We don't have much time, I think. I think, we can have questions afterwards, we're fine. So I think two people who we'd also like to mention, these are deaf colleagues who've done research. Nelson finished his PhD very recently, and Fernanda 1 year ago. And typically your thesis has to be written in Portuguese and edited in that way. But this is the first time we've actually had a PhD thesis in sign language, Libras, on video. And the program accepted that they could include a Libras thesis. So it was great to see that actually we can make theoretical contributions in our own language to the level of a PhD thesis. I think it's actually available online, so you're welcome to watch it. Obviously, the video, I think, is about 7 hours. It is a PhD thesis, after all, so it's not a quick view. This also has spoken Portuguese for people who don't understand Libras, but you can see what the format looks like. But this is the equivalent of a thesis, so it's a considerable piece of work.
And the website is open to anyone. It's accessible, so you can take advantage of that and see it. This is another researcher, Renata Kreuser, who's been looking at technology and the uses of technology. She's a designer, but she also works in the field of translation, and her work relates to that, and sign language translation specifically. She looked at design and how translation could be melded into a multimodal environment, and how you can then produce a translation that would include pictures and videos and different resources and different designs. And she spent hours and hours working on this. She had a deaf individual look at the results of her work, and she wanted to see how they read the video and how they understood it. There is a video player that she has created that you can see, and it will take different images or stories and change them into Libra. So it's a fantastic endeavor. And it took her hours and hours to create this, and it makes a different type of different text.
We also have Katia, who is ongoing with her research at the moment. She works as an interpreter and translator, and she was interested in what happens if you're going from Libras into ASL or international or other languages. So we're expecting to see that there will be more interpreting and translation, not just thinking about Portuguese, written or spoken, but also between other sign languages from other countries.
Now, this individual is here in the audience today. Yeah, he's a researcher. He just graduated a month ago with his doctorate. Let's congratulate him, everyone, yes. And Marcos, his research was on curriculum and how to develop a curriculum He researched 8 various universities and what they were doing. He did a comparison, a contrastive comparison of the focus of their curriculum. His goal was to advance what we were doing and promote translation and studies, especially in different fields or disciplines. And also to understand the institutionalization of the curriculum and that process. So he looked at teaching translation and different settings and curriculum that we use to teach translation, and what the gaps were and what the different resources were that were available. But you can see him here, and this afternoon I think he'll be talking about his work. There's also another researcher as well, Tiago. I think Tiago is here as well in the audience. And he'll be talking about his research this afternoon. Obviously right now I don't have time, but he'll have the opportunity to talk about his own work this afternoon. So, in terms of the future, what does the future look like for us? We have to look at teaching and pedagogy and develop our curriculum and enhance the field. We have to include technology in what we're doing. We're looking at translation studies and interpretation studies in spoken languages and other fields and including that into what we're doing.
And we can also think about more research in new areas which we can use to inform our teaching. That's the way we can shape a different future. It's important that when we have this research, we're able to work in collaboration so that we're able to ensure that we can share the information and change people's minds. Also, use it to inform the government so that we can change the way we teach interpreters to meet future needs.
And we absolutely must include deaf people within the process. They always have to be present. I remember when I first started back in 1992, or maybe it was 1997 in Austria. It was 1997, I think, in Austria, at the World Federation of the Deaf. I saw various speakers, and I remember what happened in 1997, and I think we need to continue to do what we've been doing. We must work with the deaf community, we must include the deaf community, have more deaf people available and present. And we've been doing that in Brazil, and that's absolutely our future.
And just lastly, we've studied sign language, translation research, we've gained lots of knowledge. We have also benefited from translation from spoken languages, but we're also generating new knowledge. And we need to work in collaboration with our colleagues, so not only do we learn from them, but they learn from us. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
Yes, please come to our conference next year. It's November 9th to the 13th, 2020.
Wow. Thank you for such an inspiring, breathtaking presentation. You really do make a change in the world. You're not just changing Brazil, but you're showing us how we can make sure we work in partnership with the deaf community, how we can include their needs, their wants, their views, their perspectives, and that as we teach interpreters, as we produce new interpreters and translators, they then also are able to shape the future. You're like the mothers who are birthing the children for the world. I'm a grandmother now. Yes, indeed. I looked on Twitter, and I think you've generated a lot of interest, a media storm. So thank you very much for your leadership and for helping us to understand a better vision for the future. Muito obrigado. And thank you to the interpreters too, all of the working interpreters. Thank you. Just awesome work. Thank you.